I'm a retired journalist, although my friends tell me you never quite retire. I spent most of my career at the LA Times, all around the newsroom as an editor. My final title was assistant managing editor. I oversaw the copy desk, was also the standards editor, also known as the chief censor, that was fun. And that was it. I had a great career. I blinked and it was over.
Henry, tell us about your childhood and how you got interested in journalism.
Oh, my childhood was pretty bucolic, calm. I'm the product of, I guess we'd say, a mixed marriage, at least in the terminology of the 50s and 60s. My mother, now deceased, my late great mother, was from Japan. Met my father, who was a U.S. Navy man. They met in the 50s and married in the mid-50s. I came along pretty quickly, was born in 1956 in the greater Tokyo area. As a young Navy man with the family, he was allowed to transfer back to the United States. So we came to California in 1957. Quickly, 3 siblings came along, and we were the classic kind of 50s, 60s, 70s California family. Except differently, Mom worked full-time while raising the kids. Dad was often stationed at distant places, but they decided to sort of set roots down in one spot rather than have us move all over the place. We stopped in a place called Port Hueneme, which is the Navy town of Ventura County. It's about an hour's drive north of Los Angeles, and that was home from age 8 for me till I went off to college. And so we had this very stable environment. All my mom's friends were other Japanese moms from the old country. All the dads were Navy men. All the kids we knew were like us. I don't think we knew the term Hapa yet. It might have been a little more pejorative back in the 60s, but half and half. And those were a lot of our friends. It was a very diverse area, a lot of Latino kids. Farming is a big industry there besides the Navy. A lot of surfer dudes. There were a lot of black kids. It was a very diverse group. And unlike, say, LA in the area, it was just very quiet in retrospect. And I thought, this is me looking back through rose-colored glasses. My siblings say, no, it was pretty calm. It was just a great place to grow up. Classic kind of math science nerd. I fell under the sway of a really great couple of math teachers. I didn't know you could make a living out of English. I loved words too and reading, but in fact, my English professor said, well, no, you can't actually make English your career unless you want to teach it. So yeah, you should go do that math science thing that Mr. Hilliman is having you do. And so I went to college thinking I was going to be an engineer. I had no inkling that journalism was a thing I might do. And just through a couple of strokes of luck, I was at a place called Caltech in Pasadena, pretty well-known engineering school, not a crucible for future journalists. In fact, quite the opposite. There were women in the school for only about 5 years, so it was mostly a lot of unwashed, figuratively, literally unwashed, uncouth engineering dudes, some of whom put out a newspaper. So by chance, I had a new roommate, was reassigned halfway through my freshman year. He was best friends with the editor-in-chief of the paper, and the editor-in-chief goes, hey, we're always looking for production help on the paper. Can you come down and help us put out the paper? I'm like, what am I doing on a Thursday night? So I visit the little newsroom and immediately kind of fall into the thing. I mean, journalism is like I learned how to set type and paste up the pages, and I'm quickly writing stories, and before I know it, I'm an editor. Sophomore year, I'm editor-in-chief. I don't even know how this is going on, except I'm spending all my time in this little newsroom, having been bitten severely by the bug, and was spending all my time working on the paper and a little less time on my studies. So the great bit of serendipity was meeting the editor through my roommate, and then being recruited and just thinking, this is like more fun than doing differential equations and studying physics, which I turned out to be pretty bad at. And the second great stroke was that partway through, I was reporting and got to meet some of the administration, covering the provost and the president. Minding my own business one day, the secretary to the president said, hey, what are you doing this coming summer? This after my sophomore year. I go, well, I guess I'm going to go back home. I don't have a job. And she goes, would you like to stay in Pasadena? One of our professors needs someone to house it for him. This is the summer of '77. And I said, that sounds good. And the deal was I could live there. The rent was $30 a month, pretty good price even for 1977. And so I've got a place to live. And it turns out he's a pretty famous professor named Bruce Murray. In his spare time, he runs the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, the big space lab that Caltech manages. And so I'm wasting all my time at the paper. I'm doing no time studying. And I'm about 2 steps ahead of the registrar. And I realize I need to drop out of school. I'm not very happy. I'm not doing well. Need to take a break. And I report to my professor, my landlord, and say, I'm going to have to move out. I'm going to have to go back home. I'm quitting school. He goes, well, wait a minute. You're you're working almost full-time with the school paper. You seem to like that. Let me make a few calls. And so next thing you know, I'm on the staff as a junior, like academic part-time employee at the Jet Propulsion Lab in the media office. So I think one of the lessons as we look back on our careers, generally people can think of 2 or 3 or more places where they're just pure luck. Not just the bootstraps level, pulling yourself up working, but just things happen.
How long were you at JPL?
I ended up staying there for 8 years. So I started in college, realized quickly I was going to not go back to Caltech. I went to UCLA for a year thinking I might be an engineering major. Still didn't like it. Ended up at Cal State Los Angeles, which is the nearest program with journalism, and took 8 years to finish college. But I just never left JPL, and so worked there a couple years after college. The thing was, in the 70s and 80s, I had no role models to be a journalist, right? So I had a degree in journalism from Cal State LA, my BA. I'd worked in words, working as a media person at JPL, but I had no idea how to become a journalist. There was no model for me. But I did think that's something I wanted to do, not work in public affairs, public relations, but be a journalist. I was writing press releases and seeing reporters turn them into stories that weren't any better than what I was writing as a PR person. So I'm 29, about to turn 30. My girlfriend at the time, whom I met at JPL, decided to go to the Columbia Graduate School of Journalism in New York. And I figured I'll just go with her. And so we moved in, I guess it's 1986. And I got a job working at Columbia doing similar work. And as things go, she graduated, got a job in Florida. That was the end of the relationship. But here I'm in New York. I go, I should do the same thing she did. I quit my job and I became a student at Columbia and did my master's in one year, 88, 89. And now I have 2 degrees in journalism. And I'm still not quite sure how to become a journalist. I met a very charismatic recruiter at a job fair. And I'd already, I think, secured an internship to be a science writer at one of the papers in Pittsburgh. And so that was my thing. I'd be the former engineering student with an interest in that. I'd be a science writer. 1989, I'm not a kid anymore. I'm like 32, and I'm finally going to be a journalist. But I don't know how to do it. I have this internship lined up. But I met this recruiter at a job fair named Caesar Williams, and he said, hey, take my test. I'm looking for copy-editors for this new program at Times New Company at Newsday. I'm going to be a reporter. I don't even know what a copy editor is. He goes, take my test, take my test, take my test. I took his test. And apparently I did well, because suddenly I'm in this pool of finalists to go to Newsday, to be in this new program called MetPro, Minority Editorial Training Program, and to become a copy editor. It was not what I intended, but just the happenstance. It's like meeting the roommate, having my landlord be this important guy who gave me a job, meeting this recruiter. What if I'd walked the other way at this big old job fair? I ran into this guy and he says, take my test. So I'm the accidental journalist. And so through a series of serendipitous moments, but, some hard work in there too, but a lot of luck, I'm suddenly a journalist at age 32 at the mighty Newsday, a great newspaper on Long Island, New York, in this program called MetPro. So you couldn't plan it that way.
And it was the second year of your MetPro that you were sent to the LA
Yeah,
Times?
so it's always seen as a 2-year program. They trained 8 of us to be copyers at Newsday, and then we were sent out just by coincidence, not coincidence. There were 8 newspapers in the Times Mirror Company, as was then called. So each of us went to one paper. One stayed in Newsday, the rest of us were dispersed, and I got to come back to California, the LA Times. By then, MetPro had been around for 5 years as a reporting program. So, a few dozen MetPro grads around the company, several at the LA Times. So there's a little bit of a foundation. But coming back home to LA in 1990, I was very green. I'd been a copy editor for like 9 months at Newsday. I'd had 2 degrees in journalism, but I had no experience in a newsroom. So it was my second newsroom. And I walk into this place, and at the time there's like 1,000 people. And I'm the new kid. I'm in this experimental program, still kind of experimental, MetPro, and feeling the weight of a lot of imposter syndrome and feeling a little bit out of my element, working with people that, what was then seen as one of the top, probably 3 or 4 papers in the country. So no pressure being the first, no pressure being in this huge group of kind of hard scrabble, competitive type A journalists in 1990s. So somehow I got through.
When did you become a member of AAJA? How did you first find out?
Somewhere around 89. So people mistake my silver hair for me being like a founder adjacent person. I think of myself as founder adjacent, but the thing had been around for about 8 or 9 years. So I learned about a scholarship, the AAJA scholarship in 88. I applied for it, didn't get it, but somewhere in there I joined. So it would have been 89 or 90 when I was a member of the New York chapter during my Newsday year.
What were your first impressions of the association?
It was great. I don't think we did a lot of events per se, but just meeting members almost from my first moments at Newsday. I was introduced quickly to Henry Moritsugu. I think he was the first and greatest Henry of AAJA. I'm in the top 10 of Henrys maybe, but he was the guy, and he took all of us in the program under the wing. We were all journalists of color, a couple of Asian American young people, Latina, some black journalists. So we were a diverse group in a diversity program, and Henry took all of us under his wing. Several of us were from out of town. He had us over to that first Thanksgiving dinner. We're away from our families. We met his wife and his son Ken, also a noted AAJ member and journalist. So meeting Henry from the start, I think, was by design. He was introduced to us and mentored us. He was a copy editor, and already well into his career, probably in his 50s. And famously, Henry worked well into his 80s at Newsday, and so he was essential. I also met a reporter named Gwen Young. I think she might have later become an editor, but there were a few Asian Americans in the newsroom, and many people of color. We were introduced to them fairly quickly. Even though the people running the training part were generally not journalists of color, we met a lot of folks, and what was, by industry standards, a pretty diverse place. Certainly by today's standards, not as diverse as you would desire.
What kept you as a member of AAJA?
Just the connections. I mean, I think the term networking had been invented, but I don't think we use that word the same way we do kind of just so casually now. It's for networking. Business cards were still a thing, but it was a way to connect with people. So I think it was just having literal members of AAJ like Henry and Gwen take us under their wing, and we met more people on the New York Newsday staff. And when I got to the LA Times, there were even more. Not just members of AAJ, but 3 of the 6 founders. I did not have the experience that many people in my generation had of being the first and only person of color in their newsroom. That was not me. Newsday and the LA Times were somewhat diverse, certainly not at the levels of other newsrooms in radio, TV, print, where there were 0 journalists of color. So there were always friendly faces around, and there was an affinity between people of the different groups, different organizations, but specifically AAJ, there were people who were inclined to want to help me as I got started in that very big, scary newsroom. 3 of my first 4 bosses over the first 7 or 8 years were, in order, Karen Wada, who was the assistant managing editor, later deputy managing editor. She was in charge of hiring and development, so was my boss when I was a Met Pro and rotating around the newsroom, trying out different jobs. Very influential, an early member of AAJA. Simon Lee was, I think, the foreign editor, or the deputy foreign editor, but he was running the place basically when I was there for my Met Pro rotation. Very supportive, and there were other Asian Americans on the staff there. I spent a lot of time in the interim and calendar, about 7-8 years, working with people like Gail Takashira, an early copy editor at the LA Times, David Kishiyama, whom I only later found out was the founder of AAJ. It was not like something it was not on his business card, or there was no placard on the wall of his office. It was just part of who David was, but obviously a very supportive person. And then 1998, about 8 years in, I had come to know Bill Singh, not through the newsroom, but through AAJ events. The newsroom was in the downtown LA Times newsroom of the era, from 1938 to 2018, when they moved, was 1 block square. 1 block between 1st and 2nd Street on the north and south, Broadway and Spring on the east and west. It was huge. And so Bill worked basically a block from me in the same big newsroom. So I never saw Bill. I would never have met him at work because I was on the other side of the newsroom and calendar. But got to know each other at AAJ events, like scholarship banquets, or there'd be appearances. Bill, being one of the 6 founders and kind of the star of our group, was always around. And so he got to know me as just another staffer through these events. I think we connected at the convention in 1993 in Seattle. There was a last-minute drop at. We had like some sort of trivia competition. I was the fill-in, and my partner and I, we just creamed the rest of the team. So I think Bill might have witnessed that. So somehow I made an impression through AAJ. So it's, again, one of those things where it just happenstance, where I would have met Bill eventually. I might not have worked with him, but he knew me through AAJ. AAJ was literally the connection between me and Bill Singh. And he had an opening, and I applied for it. And he, after several interviews, I don't know who I was up against, but I got the job. The thing I say about this job, and Bill will deny this, we never talked about it, but I think he hired me even though I was not qualified for this job. I had been a copy editor and a news editor. I was certainly accomplished in that kind of work, laying out pages, putting together a section, doing work like David Kishiyama before me, to just making the section come out. A finisher, right? A production-oriented person. I'd never been part of directing coverage, working with reporters that directly, and that was the job as a signing editor. And Bill hires me for this job, which is I'm not inspired to do, but I was not good for a while. I was not ready, and yet he hired me. Now maybe he did see something in me that I did not know about myself. He could see me growing into the job. He took a chance in me. Bill might deny this. He might say, no, it wasn't obvious. You were a good choice. There was no chance involved. But I really feel like he believed in me before I even knew what I could do, because we had connected through AAJA.
How have you tried to pay that mentorship forward?
Just by being an officer. I've been president of AAJA LA, co-president 3 times. I've had every officer job at the chapter level. I'm now privileged to serve on the national board of directors. I presided over the copy desk department, where I eventually rose to become assistant managing editor at a time when the paper was shrinking. So I lost people faster than I hired them, but I was able to hire 3 or 4 Asian American journalists, including people I had never met, but only knew through the networking of AAJA, where I had an opening, might have mentioned a Doris Trong or someone, my friends at the Washington Post, New York Times, said, I'm looking for a copy editor. You know why I'm asking, who do you know? And so through them I met Jay Wong, who was in Washington at the USA, I think USA Today, previously at ESPN. Hired him after meeting him for like 30 minutes on his way out of LA. He was in LA, going back home, met him for like lunch, hired him. My second big hire was a guy named Bo Herzog, who's now in Seattle, longtime member. Literally never met him, had never heard of him, even though we're both copy editors. And he's like a younger version of me in terms of his career path. Had been in Detroit, I think might have been in Seattle or Portland when I learned about him. And basically friends like Doris are saying, you should hire this guy. Hired him based on a phone interview and his resume and the approval, the recommendations of other AAJ folks that I trusted. So I only ended up hiring about 10 people, but several through AAJ connections, and that's a way too. The same way that Bill hired not just me, but several other folks he knew through AAJ. It's just it's the connections you make. We're an affinity group. I think that word has a literal importance. We come together out of shared culture, history, some overlapping. You know, we're a very diverse group, as others have made the case. We're Asian American men writ large, and in all the different manifestations of that term. But there's that affinity we have as AAPI, citizens first and journalists second. It's not, it can't be overstated how important that personal connection is to things like mentoring, development, literally hiring. You know, so I can say I got at least that one big job through AJ, and it led to everything that followed was really based on Bill taking a chance on me.
You have mentioned not only mentors, but also and founders, but also folks like Henry and Ken Moritsugu. What does the term AAJA family mean to you?
Well, before we had hashtags, it was sort of this unstated, AAJ family was just the thing. I think a lot of people, for example, met at conferences. Most of my friends in AAJ I met at a convention somewhere. The non-LA Times people, and it's just the social element, the connection, and the idea that when someone has a triumph, a promotion, a big story, you have this built-in fan club. You have a minimum of a couple thousand people pulling for you because they read about your story in the newsletter, or now that with social media, it's shared in Twitter or in Facebook. It's like, I used to work with that person, or I met that person in Seattle or in Hawaii or wherever the convention was. It's the connection you make almost instantly when you walk into the convention hall and you see a bunch of people who are doing what you're trying to do from all over the industry, from all ages and backgrounds. It's just the idea that we're connected. And now that I'm not the boy wonder, that was a long time ago, but an elder, it's fun to still spend time with younger AAJ folks because they're the future and the present, and they're full of ideas and energy. And I feel, if not younger, I feel energized around my fellow members of AAJ. It's a great thing. Like I said, maybe the term networking wasn't even a term of art, but it's what we do. Not just for career advancement, not just for jobs. It's the idea of being there for one another, right? That's the thing, having one another's backs.
AAJA turns 40 in 2021. Where do you imagine it will be in another 40 years?
I don't know. You're so busy making something valuable and helping one another. It's hard to look forward. So you're asking me to look forward while looking back, I guess, is the question. And so it's come so far. It's affected so many people positively. It's launched careers, it's sustained careers. It's helped people through the tough times. It's when people have been laid off, have lost their jobs. There's that great emotional support system. It's the leg up, it's the tip on the next job to get you out of the situation. Those are all important things. So I think the people thing to me is always the most important thing. 2021 is a lot different from 1981, and yet there seem to be similarities. You know, the anti-AAPI hate. We're deep into the 21st century. People, what's going on out there, right? As we're talking, the Attorney General of California reported that hate crimes have risen against AAPIs by have doubled in the last year. It almost seems like an undercount. It seems like it's worse. Those are reported hate crimes. So it's a fraught world, and AAJA has to figure out, does the 40-year kind of progression that got us here, does that work, or do we have to be more activist? It's been interesting to me and heartening to hear that a couple of our founders say we need to be more activist, not less. They're the most traditional people we would know by generation, by age. The youngest is in his mid-60s, the others in their 70s are saying, speak louder, speak more often, and don't be afraid to. Now maybe as retirees we can say that because we're not trying to stay within the dictates of an employer, but I do think it's interesting, and I've always said from the time I got active in AAJA as a leader that it's the first two words are Asian American, right? We're Asian Americans first who happen to be journalists, right? We are human first, and we are here for one another first. And so I think the more we can do to know when to raise our voice and to be confident we can raise our voice, because it's not just me speaking or an individual, it's the nearly 2,000 plus members currently, all the folks who've preceded us who can not always speak with one voice, but speak together and write, and maybe we can all listen to one another. That's a strength. We know that the people who listen to us, even if they disagree with our points, and so that's the strength of AAJA. And so can we find a way to speak up more often? And so I think in real time we've sort of shown we can do that. Even as we're working on a strategic plan and trying to formalize what the next 30, 40 years will be, in real time we've had to, because of Atlanta, step up. And we didn't agonize over it. The board, all the supportive members who were part of it, were speaking up in real time immediately and offering resources to folks covering Atlanta, speaking up against sort of tone-deaf coverage and the mistakes and all that. That was really exciting to watch. And so I would say more, please. And I think that is a big part of what's being baked into the formal plan, is to find a way to be not just journalists, but Asian Americans who happen to be journalists who happen to be Asian, but whatever. It's that intersection of who we are and who we speak for, right? It's not just doing a better job as organizations, but survival is, I think, a big part of what's happening with journalism. And you can't survive, persist, thrive if you are disconnected from your audience, from your rapidly diversifying audience. And so you would think brass tacks money would be a good incentive for organizations to evolve. But it's hard. And it's the people in AAJA and other groups, all of us who are trying to speak and be heard. And I think today the workforce demands to be heard, and organizations are, whether they want to or not, are being compelled to listen better. And AAJA is a big part of inculcating and encouraging those discussions. I'm very proud of AAJA and what it's doing right now.
Henry, there's so much disruption going on in media across print, broadcast, public media, the rise of nonprofit journalism. What role do you see AAJA playing for its members at a time when even the definition of who is a journalist is up for debate?
I don't know. I think that I'm not a visionary. I'm a guy who hopes to get things done. I don't know if I have the answer to that question. I think AAJA should be as open and welcoming as possible to anyone who wants to be part of it. Right. I mean, some of the most accomplished journalists out there are not formally trained as journalists. I have 2 degrees in journalism. I think that's actually not ideal. I think people should try to, in their studies, broaden their base of expertise, have lots of experience, and they should be welcome to AAJA if they put words together for a living, for an audience that is looking for information, delivered with authority and trust. That's journalism, and the people who make it are journalists. And so I think that's an important thing, is to be open to all kinds of folks who want to be part of our association. I think we're pretty good about that. I'm a people person. I just think the AAJA can be a lot of things to a prospective member, but it's the people who are the association. I think of the 6 founders who are, they were and are badass. I mean, to think of the audacity that they had to, let's make AAJA. Think about Bill Singh, a couple years out of college, had the necessity to approach Trisha and say, let's make an association. So they took a lot of risks, at a time when even joining a group, let alone creating it, was seen as sort of a political act or a possible source of attention you don't want. You just want to do your job and get ahead. You don't want to be seen as some sort of rabble rouser. They did that. They put a lot on the line, and they've stuck with it and with us for all these years. And so I think we owe it to them to try to keep pushing it forward. And so I'm really a big believer in the people aspect of it. That might seem kind of banal and trite, but it's really the people. And so knowing members who were in their teens, which I do, some of my students in their 20s and 30s, the mid-career folks who are now not just representing us, they're running places. Top editors at the New Yorker, New York Times, the LA Times with the not quite majority Asian American masthead, but about a third of it, 40% of it. That's kind of impressive. So I think AJ folks are not just representing, but they're running a lot of things, and I think there's more to come. And so I think that's exciting too. It's the continuum that makes it important, interesting to me. So I like being the old guy in the room. I earned the silver hair honestly through a lot of hard work and a lot of stresses and stuff. That's journalism, but I like the people aspect, just hanging out with other members, and if they honor me with their questions and think I might have some advice, that's a big boost to the ego. But I have to preface it by saying, well, I've been out of the game for a while, and I haven't applied for a job in about 30 years. I mean, once I got to the Times, things sort of happened. So, but yeah, I'll read your resume, or I'll write you a letter, or I can tell you how to reach Sewell Chan, or I can tell you how to reach the person at the destination you want to go to. So I think it's just the continuation of just the ladder and leaving the ladder and bringing people up the ladder, not pulling the ladder behind you, but just keep people coming through the pipeline. JCamp, Voices, ELP, the conventions, all the work together. It works, right? Looking back at age in my mid-60s here, at being wide-eyed and joining the news business late in life and having AAJ be so important to me at the start, it's easy to look back, and I could probably, if you force me, name a dozen stories that I was proud to be part of, but it would take me some work. I can name hundreds of people, maybe in the 4 figures of people I met at the LA Times or AJ, that I remember them more than the work. And that's the thing. Think about the people that you came up with who helped you, people you've helped along the way. That's really that's the thing. I would say enjoy the people part of it, because it's what makes it tolerable, doable, and together we can do so much, that can make a difference, right? And that's really what it's about.